The SEC Media Day news cycle was hijacked yesterday because conference realignment is back and seemingly more legitimate than ever, right? Like there's some real juice here. Again, my first instinct at least was that this was just some BS, tiny report, but it comes out of the Houston Chronicle. Is it Brent Zimmerman? I wish I could.
Brandt's his last name, Gil Brandt, right?
I thought it was something with a Z. Either way, the Houston Chronicle reporting that that Oklahoma and Texas want to join the SEC, and then that report being corroborated by many. There's even some reports that as early as next week, the two schools will tell the Big 12 that they are not going to renew their media contracts in 2025. Right. And again, as we said during headlines, no denial coming out of any of the parties that are involved here. There's so many different areas that there's so many different ways you could take this conversation where it starts, but let's start maybe with the most basic question. As a fan, Jake, do you want to add OU and Texas to the SEC?
So I don't really know if I've had time to fully come up with what I want or what I even think about this. Obviously, you're talking about two institutions that are blue blood program type of institutions. You're talking about an Oklahoma team that's won national championships in the last 20 years. Same thing with Texas, right? You're talking about more revenue. You're talking about a lot of things that they would add in a positive way. I don't know how I feel about 16 teams. I don't know how you divide that equally. I don't know, the 8 and 8, or is it 4 pods of 4? I mean, what is the solution there? Is this in every sport? Is this just in football? What's the travel look like?
I hadn't even considered that.
Because
what football, like, is it football?
Because of some of the comments that people have made over the last couple of days talking about, hey, football doesn't have to do the same things field hockey does, right? Is it a football-only thing? There's so many questions. Obviously, your conference gets more difficult. I mean, I don't think there's any question about that. In multiple sports, if it is a multiple sport deal, if this happens, what happens to the other teams in the Big 12? What happens to the ACC and the Big 10? What are they going after? Because they're not going to let the SEC do this and sit on their hands. So there's a lot of moving parts, and obviously, we're going to find out more information. Like, the competitor in me says, okay, cool, man. You want to come play with the big boys? Come play with the big boys. Oklahoma, you're not making the playoff every year anymore. Get that out of your mind. That's gone. Texas, you've struggled for a while now. It's been since 2009 since you've won the Big 12. 6-6 in the Alamo Bowl. Giddy up. That's what you're about. So that's initially where my mind goes. But obviously, still, I mean, they're competitive teams. They would bring some competitive nature to the SEC without question.
I think that in terms of what happens to the Big 12, it absolutely breaks the Big 12's back. They might not survive the potential fallout from this because right now we live in the Power 5.
Even if it doesn't happen, it feels like this is.
It is already kind of like a shot across the Big 12's bow, for sure, even if it doesn't end up happening. This now gives Oklahoma and Texas a ton more leverage in any sort of negotiating situation. But so right now we live in the era of the Power 5, right? There are a lot of ideas out there that what this ends with is actually a Power 4. And is the Big 12 the conference that gets eliminated in that kind of reorganization? Because what you would have is other teams suddenly scrambling, trying to add teams to their conference.
Right.
And so all of a sudden, I've seen this idea put out there a lot. In fact, it's kind of funny. I think Peter Burns, he quote tweeted himself from 10 years ago, back in 2011. He tweeted about this very thing. You have 4 16-team super conferences. Now, I will say this though: none of this is guaranteed in terms of how it could work. And maybe it doesn't even stop at 16 with the SEC.
Right.
Like maybe you go. There is an idea out there. Now this is obviously way more fundamentally different and drastic, but there's an idea out there that maybe you push almost towards an NFL setup, like literally a 32-team league, something along those lines, where you only play each other and you just straight up make the NFL on Saturday, right? I mean, the TV contracts would be absolutely absurd. And make no mistake, that's a lot of what this is about, is the consistency of the money that the SEC is producing, and also about what that money will be going into the future. Obviously, right now the SEC gets $55 million a year for their TV rights from CBS. In a couple of years, that is going to, remember, we're talking about the Disney SEC network symbol. In a couple of years, that's going to be up to 10 years, $300 million a year. And guess what? If you were to add Oklahoma and to Texas, and let's say, like we kind of touched on last week, let's say you cut off, or you cut out like the cupcake games, and it was only good on good the entire year, that 10-year, $300 million, I would say that would get reworked, and it would be even higher. Like, the number's going to go even higher.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many different possibilities, because if we would be on here, Radio Row, 3-4 years ago, how many things that are currently happening in college football would we say absolutely not? There's no way in hell that you can transfer with no penalty from SEC school to SEC school and be able to play. We'd say there's no way in the world that the Alabama quarterback is making almost $7 figure.
Yeah.
It might get up to that. We just started 2 weeks ago.
Give it a couple years. Let Bryce Young hit him and start a game. Let him go ball out. Exactly. He might get up to $7 million.
So 7 figures off his name, image, and likeness, right? So who knows? Who knows if we end up with a 32-team, just NFL-style, blue blood type of league? Part of me is like, okay, there's not going to be any boring games. You lose a little bit of the pageantry of college football.
Yeah, I mean, you definitely lose the purity, right? I mean, you firmly, at that point, you firmly acknowledge the reality that you are a semi-professional league, essentially, and it's not you're no longer even going to have the opportunity for like an App State, Michigan upset or anything like that. Although those don't happen often, it won't, like, or like you said, even like UL going to Iowa State and beating them. Like, in this situation, unfortunately, those games go the way they go. But it's hard to get away from just the reality business side of this, and it feels like this is where everything is moving.
So I said it earlier. I want to get your thoughts on this. If this happens, if we see realignment again, does it mean that it happens in every sport? Because, like, to me, like the West Virginia deal being in the Big 12 and the stress that puts on softball and swimming and diving and soccer, like I can't even imagine travel-wise, like what that does for your budget. Could it be strictly a football-only thing? Now, because, there's some examples, like, beach volleyball for LSU. They don't play in the SEC. There's not an SEC. They play in a different conference. Florida lacrosse and soccer, like men's side thing. Like they play in a different.
Oh wow, Florida has men's soccer.
I'm pretty sure they play like the Big East, right? So there's some different times.
Does the Big East still exist in basketball?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So there's some different times when you have sports that are in different conferences. Now that's a little bit different because it's smaller sports, but. Does that happen in college football? Like if you create this 32 league or even you 16-team Super League, well, does it happen in every sport?
I think a 16-team Super League, I do think. Like I think if just Texas and Oklahoma had, I think all the major sports should transfer over. Now, maybe not some of the smaller ones, but I do think, think about it from a baseball perspective. Adding Texas, how exciting that would be.
Basketball.
And even basketball, right? So, yes, I do think the big three would transfer over. I don't know about the smaller sports. What could it look like if they did? How about this? Let's say, and Bill Bender from Sporting News, so I love Bender's work. He had a great piece on this, and just looking at what the conference could potentially look like. If you were just to go geographic, how's this for a hypothetical SEC West? Oklahoma, Texas, Arkansas, LSU, Ole Miss, Mississippi State, Mizzou, Texas A&M.
Yeah.
And then in the East, you'd have Alabama, Auburn, Georgia, Florida, Kentucky, South Carolina, Tennessee, and Vanderbilt. That's kind of fascinating to me because in terms of quality throughout, I think the West is actually stronger in that potential realignment. But in terms of top-heavy power, Alabama, Auburn, Georgia, Florida. I mean, even if you just want to say Alabama, Georgia, Florida, like that is bringing a lot to bear there.
So that was a conversation upstairs yesterday whenever this was breaking because, look, we have beat writers from every team here. We have radio people from every team. We've got national writers. Like, so everybody's here. Like, we know what Media Day is. And people couldn't agree on what the equal format would be. And you laid it out there. It's like, oh, it's easy. You kick these teams to the East, you kick them to the West. Y'all know it's not that easy. Y'all know somebody's going to complain about it. You know somebody's going to have a problem with it. So that's why people started to bring up, like, the 4-team 4 different pods.
Yeah, the 4 pods.
I'm with y'all. 8-8. Let's figure it out. Hey, you're over here. You over here. People were already complaining, trying to figure out a way to escape A, B, and C. These 3 teams. I mean, it's going to be a mess whenever it happens.
Well, and speaking of complaining, we should mention this. All it takes is 4 no's, I believe, to stop this from happening.
I thought it was 3.
Is it 3? Okay.
Is it 4?
I think it's 4, but we'll check.
Either way, we know 2 of them.
That's what I was going to say. A&M obviously does not want this. They make a lot of hay by being the only Texas team in the SEC. Yeah. They've seen huge recruiting spikes, which is also, Jimbo being very good, but they can sell the SEC, Absolutely. The money it brings in, et cetera, right? Come play in the conference that produces the best NFL players, all these things. Right. And A&M hates Texas. They don't want them to have anything good. Right. They left the Big 12 for a reason.
Right.
So they're a hard no, and then Mizzou as well is a hard no. So we'll see what ends up happening. But the thing is, man, they can be no's. But if enough power gets behind this, right? How did every single coach open up their press conference today thanking Greg Sankey? If Greg Sankey wants this to happen, he can talk to the right people and be like, hey, look, we just, you got to accept this. It's going down.
So, okay, let's say you got to get 4 no's, all right? Let's just say that's the number. Texas, A&M, no, that ain't it.
Mizzou's already said Missouri's no. They're already on record to say
Missouri's
no.
No, that's not happening. We kind of created our own footprint up here. Who else, in your opinion, give me 2 more teams that you think would absolutely say, you know what, ain't no way we're doing that,
I wonder how LSU feels about it, right? Because they already have to go into Texas, and does it make Texas more competitive, in terms of recruiting battles? Plus, there's a good chance that you end up with Oklahoma and Texas potentially on your side of the bracket if you keep it at just 2 conferences.
LSU's not one to run away from a challenge.
They're not running one away from, and let's be clear, right? I don't think while Ross Bjork at A&M, while he has to please his fan base, so he will fight against this. I think the public line that all coaches will take is going to be the bring it on line, right? Even Jimbo yesterday talking about be careful what you wish for, which he's absolutely right.
Would Georgia be okay with this, adding Alabama and Auburn to the East?
Well, look, if that was indeed how the realignment shook out, I don't know, right? Maybe Georgia goes against it. The thing is, though,
and I'm thinking other sports too. They're not a great baseball team.
No,
they're not a great basketball team. No. Right, so there you are in the 3 major sports. You would take a hit in football, adding Alabama to your side. You already aren't great in the other 2, and you're adding teams that are better than you in the other 2, right? So I'm just thinking of all the possibilities of teams that could say no. Georgia might be up there with one that says, you know what, we kind of like the way the East is.
So I feel like with everybody outside of A&M, who obviously has a vested interest, and Mizzou, just because they're not trying, they too like their former Big 12, we made it in the SEC sort of status. Yeah. Everybody else, I think at the end of the day, is just going to be beholden to the dollar.
Yeah.
And if this means more, imagine that, right? If this means more money for television contracts.
It always just means more.
Well, yes, exactly. It just means more money. So they're going to join. And we're all going to give it the thumbs up. I do wonder, though. So you think LSU would be?
I do.
Would be cool with this.
I think LSU would be okay with it.
Well,
I do. You're talking about.
Because, I feel like LSU would maybe have one of the biggest vested interests in keeping them out because of geography and everything, and adding another Western power.
I understand what you're saying. There's not a track record of LSU shying away from things like this.
No. And again, it doesn't matter who wants to say no. If the right amount of power brokers are into it, it will happen. And if this Super League gets formed, guess who's going to be at the head of it? Greg Sankey.
Yep.
And if anything, this entire week has been a celebration of Greg Sankey and just how his leadership and all of these things.
What do you take from his comments saying, I'm here to talk about the 2021 season, and not saying, guys, come on now. We're not talking about that. What are we doing? I'm here to talk about the 2021 season.
I think that is not a denial, and I think he is absolutely involved in trying to make this happen. Because, again,
where's Herb?
Means more money. Yeah, Herb Vincent.
Where you at, Herb? Let me talk to you.
No more baseball questions.
No. Let me talk to you, Herbie.
All right, we've gone long here, so let's go ahead and take a break. When we get back, we can continue to touch on this, but I do want to get into yesterday's press conferences as well, so keep it locked right here on Off the Bench.